our bottom line is that we will not drop our case against Israel.
Why has South Africa been this vocal?
You cannot be indignified and then still be silent in the face of so much lying.
The ongoing tariff situation.
Africa will find itself increasingly in the eye of the storm.
From the heights of Cape Town to the diplomatic circles of Washington, Ebrahim Rasool has been at the forefront of politics, policy, and international engagement. A former premier of the Western Cape and South Africa's ambassador to the United States, he brings in a wealth of experience and insights in leadership, identity, and diplomacy in a rapidly changing world. As global dynamics shift and Africa's voice grows louder on the world stage, what lessons can we learn from South Africa's journey, and what role does the African continent play in shaping tomorrow's global order? Today, we sit down with Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, not just to reflect on this, but also to unpack the future. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Why is being honest or speaking the truth to power, which is a very noble trait, kind of frowned upon, or is not such a great trait for a diplomat?
I think that there is an orthodox diplomacy that says that you should maybe appease your host country, overlook their faults, and not vigorously defend your own country when it is the victim of palpable lies and dishonesty, such as that Afrikaners, the white South African tribe in South Africa, are the victims of a genocide. Their land is being confiscated. And you cannot smile through a whole lot of lies like that when you know that the negative impact is going to be severe on your continent. And so I don't think that there is an appetite by a very thin-skinned host to actually hear even academic truths about what is going on. The global order is changing. I think that we are in the midst of a major epochal economic shift in the world. And I think that Africa will find itself increasingly in the eye of the storm, simply because it has a third of what that economic epoch requires of the world today.
When I was looking at the definition of who a diplomat is, a definition that struck me is that a diplomat is someone who will remember the lady's birthday, but will forget her age. What do you think you should or could have forgotten about the Trump 2.0 America?
I think that I did not forget the birthday, and I certainly remembered not to mention the age. That's why I chose a very specific forum into which to speak. I did not attack the personality, nor the party, nor the administration. What I spoke about was, if you want to understand what is in the mind of the birthday boy, you've got to understand that they are choosing South Africa as a target because there is a case in the International Court of Justice that makes the birthday boy very angry. And secondly, you've got to know that the reason for making our former oppressor the victim of a genocide and a land reform process is because there is a commonality of whiteness that goes through the MAGA movement and the Afrikaner movement.
Were you shocked about how aggressive the reaction that eventually led to your expulsion?
I think there was shock. And the shock is at how thin the skin is. Because you expect someone who can dish it out to also accept it.
And do you think at any point you should have maybe handled this issue in any other way than you did?
It's a question I ask myself a lot. What could I have said that is different? And the conclusion I come to is that before I said what I said, they had already cut off all our AIDS, HIV/AIDS money, the PEPFAR grant. They had already closed the USAID office in South Africa and all its programs. They had already cut off the research money through the World Health Organization. They had already cut off all the money for our just energy transition in South Africa. They were already on the way to 25% tariffs. AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, was already in the promised to be ended. And most importantly, they had made a promise to themselves that I will be out very soon. And so the fact of the matter is, when I think through all of that, you must at least end up with your dignity intact. You cannot be indignified and then still be silent in the face of so much lying and so much damage to your country. Because at the end of the day, the damage to our country can be quantified at, just in aid, 8 billion rands worth of damage, 20,000 health workers, 200 NGOs and clinics that had to close, and the possibility of massive reinfection of HIV and AIDS.
And then after the expulsion, you come home to a hero's welcome. How did you feel about that? And what does it tell you about the whole situation? And also, as much as it was a hero's welcome in South Africa, even out of South Africa, within the continent, there appeared to be a lot of support.
Ordinary citizens of South Africa, of Africa, and of the world have a real sense that truth-telling is required, because the damage that is being wrought against the world is enormous. Just a few days after I had left, we saw the stock market stumble. We saw inflation rising. We saw tariffs go out across the world. We saw the effective end of the African Growth and Opportunities Act. So the point of the matter is, there is no rational base to speak to the United States. They only really at this moment understand the language of counterpower, and that's what China is doing. They only understand the language of standing up. That's what Canada is doing. And so weakness is what is seen when you try to be too nice.
Quite often, South Africa has drawn parallels to its apartheid era to what is happening in Palestine. How do historical experience and apartheid influence South Africa's foreign policy? And why has South Africa been this vocal?
Our memory of being denied human rights, of being jailed for our beliefs, of being divided by race, of being the victims of massacres. Our memory is very, very fresh as South Africans, and therefore what we do is we react instinctively when we see other victims of the very things that we have suffered ourselves, for which we sacrificed. And most importantly, we feel the need to step up for those who are the victims of those matters, especially when their oppression is multiplied.
Do you think that the situation that you found yourself, or the crisis that we have right now, is linked to the decision by South Africa to take Israel to the International Court of Justice?
I was told time and again by the members of Congress, members of Senate, members of the administration, think tanks, that there can be no discussion on trade negotiations with South Africa unless you drop the case in the International Court of Justice against Israel. And that was the one bottom line I went with to the United States from the entirety of South African society, from the president, from the minister of international relations, that our bottom line is that we will not drop our case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, because if we drop our case, who will hold Israel accountable, and what hope will the Palestinians have?
All right, let's also talk about the ongoing tariff situation. South Africa again. How is South Africa likely to be impacted by these tariffs?
The one obvious thing is that while we are all preparing for the African Growth and Opportunities Act to be reauthorized in September 2025, effectively the rug is being pulled out from under us already, which is a soft signal that there is no African Growth and Opportunities Act. And so, for example, a competitive advantage of South Africa on the US market was that we send affordable cars to the United States. That's now 25% subjected to tariffs. The same with aluminium and the same with steel. And so we can expect that the 10% tariffs that now cuts across all African continent will be applied to goods that also go as a goer. So that's the first shock, that the African Growth and Opportunities Act is being completed. The second one is that a lot of African entrepreneurs who have developed themselves with a predictability of trade with the United States will suddenly now find themselves in far more difficult circumstances in terms of doing that trade to the United States. And I think that the US is making a fundamental error, not only with Africa, but certainly with Africa, in the sense that you choose whether you save on tax-free and tariff-free trade, or whether you spend on migration and security challenges when people can't find a predictable pattern of doing business with the United States.
Now let's go back to the issue in Gaza and South Africa and Turkey. How aligned are the two countries diplomatically on this issue? And is there scope for deeper collaboration on the global stage?
I think that there are enormous synergies of values between the two countries. But I think that there are different degrees of vulnerability on interests. Turkey is also a NATO country, so it has much more clout and partnerships than South Africa would have. Turkey is much more integrated into the global economy and therefore may have more leverages. It is much closer to the Ukraine-Russia situation, so it has, and the Syrian situation and the Middle Eastern situation, so it may have different degrees of interests at stake. And so you act according to the combination of your values and your interests. You've got to weigh them up, and you must then expect that someone can do different things at different times, and we don't all do the same things all the time.
Still on the global stage, how can African countries, including South Africa, assert themselves more effectively on global matters without being caught up in, the tug of war of, Russia, the US, and ensure that its matters or its voice is heard?
I think you don't have to look for conflict with any superpower, because the balance of forces are enormously stacked against us. But you have to build concentric circles of partnerships and increasing power. This is the time for South Africa to be stronger in SADC. It's the time for SADC to be stronger in the African Union. It is time for the African Union to be more assertive in its partnerships with Europe, with Asia, with South America. It is more important for South Africa and the African Union to direct what happens in BRICS, so that BRICS is the shield behind which we move forward. And it is very important for BRICS to be a coherent, unfragmented entity within the G20. I think your strength is in your partnerships, not in how you poke the bear. Because the bear will see the partnerships and will know that there is an alternative world order developing, not because of the choice of everyone in there, but because of the capricious actions that has been occasioned.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rasool, for your insights and for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.